I was wrong about sunsetting. I was ignorant and blinded by my own greed, and I failed to recognize certain aspects of this proposed change to the Destiny 2 loot ecosystem. I thought to myself, well, since it doesn't really affect me, it's not such a huge deal. This could not be a more incorrect statement, let alone a more irresponsible statement and mentality to have. As I've mentioned several times in my past, it is my duty, once again, to be a responsible public figure with a following, regardless of size, and to speak out against what I view could be very easily a reversible strike against the Destiny community and player base. This is a video about gear sunsetting, a proposed change in Year 4 Destiny 2. In case you've been living under a rock or just haven't been following the game updates and teasers for Year 4, gear sunsetting is a proposed change which attempts to bring in diversity to the endgame activities which are influenced by light level advantages. This includes, but is not limited to, Iron Banner, Trials of Osiris, and any PvE activity for the most part. And since this is a PvP-centric channel, I'm going to give you a little bit of context. If you absolutely hate spare rations and mind benders and the pub stars and quick play, sunsetting neither effectively nor comes remotely close to crippling this. It does not affect this at all. Hopefully I have some attention now. Sunsetting is an attempt to bring diversity to the in-game activities by hard limiting the light level of items at a base value, say around a season's maximum infusable light level. For example, spare rations that I've acquired this season, being Season 10, Season of the Worthy, I would not ever be able to infuse that weapon past the seasonal light cap, which is 1010. This is just an example. If you want a more relatable example, if you remember Year 1 Destiny 1's weapons, not being able to infuse them, and some exotics having a node that says, upgrade this weapon to its maximum power allowed in Year 1, it would be a similar context to this, or concept rather. I'm going to explain as to why this is a horrible idea and why this could easily cripple the game and player base beyond a point where it's worth doing. I'm sure the developer means to, and has an understanding of, like, you have to break some eggs to make an omelet, but their execution right now is essentially throwing dynamite into the entire chicken coop. Instead of breaking a couple eggs to make an omelet, we're going to effectively blow up the fucking chicken coop, because why have chickens when you can have hamsters running on a wheel? I want to point out this pretty much doesn't affect me at all, since I generally just have the ability to pick up a weapon, like a decent roll in any weapon or any roll in a decent weapon, vice versa, and perform just fine in PvE and PvP. So I'm speaking entirely off of my own interest, and I'm speaking rather out of the interest of the entire community. In case you missed the agenda there, that means that I'm speaking because I don't give a shit, but I think I need to give a shit. In order to understand why this is such a negative thing, we need to take a critical look at a few fundamental concepts of Destiny loot and its acquisition, and in no particular order. This is player time investment and worth, maximum possible roll outcome of items on weapon and gear as such, and item identity. And I'll explain what I mean by all three of these, and probably others. Player time investment is something that, with the advent of random rolls, has exponentiated quite a bit actually over the expansion of the sandbox and the inclusion of things like Armor 1.5, which is what I would say is the Forsaken era, and Armor 2.0, which is what we have in Shadowkeep, which is with the permanent unlocked slots and stuff like that. Some things to consider when we take a look at an average player who is, quote, finding a perfect piece of gear is, again, in no particular order, playstyle, personality, and persona. Now let's look into the playstyle aspect of this. I believe this is self-explanatory, but we'll summarize. Is the player looking at this item for PvE or PvP? Do they want lethality or utility? What kind of player are they? How do they like to play the game? Are they hardcore? Are they casual? Etc. Going into personality, each weapon has a feel, and they're not just secondary stats attached to a model, and I'll get into this later. Armor sunsetting is kind of exempt from this one unless we consider exotics, and again, we'll talk about that later as well. And finally, we have persona, and that is that each item in the game has the ability to feel unique. This means armors with randomized statistics, weapons with random rolls, and both of these with their lore and fantasy and vice versa that you would like to place on that. So I'll move back to my main point about why this is negative. Do you mean to tell me that Bungie expects an average guy who might come home and play this game for 2 to 3 hours a night, with this actually being an ideal and more wishful scenario, and enjoy doing nothing but mindless grinding only to have this progress taken away on a regular cycle? I'm sorry, but this is absolutely not the play, Chief. I have friends who play this game like 16 hours a day, and they still do not have the rolls that they want on weapons from fucking Black Armory. Think about that. You can do that anytime you want, and they still do not have rolls on things that they have been grinding for almost a year straight on repeat. And you want to irrelevize this. You want to make this irrelevant. I don't know where the thought process is on this, and I guess I understand the logic behind it, but this is so unfriendly. This is such an unfriendly concept. To further elaborate, me, in my mindset, I find myself in this: why would I grind for possibly 1,000 hours to get a weapon roll that could possibly become irrelevant the next week? Why would I even begin to consider doing this? Anyway, let's take a look at another game that has a similar concept of quote-unquote sunsetting and break down why it worked for that game and why it wouldn't work for Destiny, and we'll compare and contrast, some elementary school stuff. The game we'll be taking a look at is, well, you probably guessed it, World of Warcraft, yet again. And I have a pretty interesting case to make about both of these games. And if you question my experience in WoW, let me help alleviate a little bit. On top of just playing the game for a very long time, I have many mediocre accolades, such as various AOTCs, CEs, gold parses, etc. So I've invested quite a bit of time into learning and understanding and mastering the game, and I feel that I am at the very least qualified to speak about this, and at the very most, just barely above qualified. So now I'm going to begin elaborating on what I mean by the weapons in Destiny have a persona by comparing them to non-legendary, non-artifact weapons in World of Warcraft. Here's an example of a Manhane weapon I have on one of my characters. Now I'm going to expect most people watching this probably don't play World of Warcraft, so I'll give a nice explanation. The thing in purple at the very top is the name. The thing underneath it that's green is where it came from, that is the heroic iteration of the raid. The item level is functionally the equivalent to the light level. Binds when picked up just refers to that I can't trade the item after I pick it up, which is you just can't trade it. One hand, sword, all that other stuff doesn't mean anything, down until we get to the point where it says plus 2,114 intellect, plus 688 stamina, plus 52 critical strike, and plus 113 mastery. The corruption system is this season's gimmick, or this patch's gimmick, so don't worry about it. And the enchantment Machinist Brilliance is pretty much like a masterwork you get to pick that improves a stat, or it gives an opportunity to proc to improve a stat. And that leads me to my next point. What a convenient segue. This is functionally, and I believe the phrase was used, a stat stick. This is functionally a stat stick. The only thing that could make this weapon any better is if I got something that was at a higher item level. Nothing else would make this better besides if the corruption was different, but that's an entirely different context, and we're not going to get into that. There is nothing about this sword that I have on my mage that changes how I would utilize it, how I would play the game, how I would approach fighting a boss or a trash mob. Nothing at all changes that. This critical strike and mastery could be versatility and haste, and it would not change how I play the game besides lowering my DPS by a comical amount. Now let's compare that to my Dire Promise that I've been using to farm Seraph Towers, and I've been using exclusively for PvE. We can see that everything about this it's pretty random. I have it built in a manner where I'm going to use it specifically for PvE because this role is really good for PvE. Swashbuckler on top of Overflow allows me to have a really, really long stint of high damage output bullets at maximum damage. The range masterwork is just there because that's what I got, and I upgraded it to 6 so that I could have my kill tracker. And High Cal serves much of the same purpose, but High Cal is also pretty nice in PvE because it staggers enemies from what I can tell. In any case, this weapon has an identity, it has a personality, it has a persona. I utilize all these things. The light level that it's at has functionally fucking nothing to do with how I utilize this weapon. Versus my sparkly little sword in WoW, which the major influencing factors for me using that is because it dropped at a very high item level or light level, and its secondary stats benefited my spec a lot better. But again, there's no secondary stats in this game, so that this argument cannot be correlated. It's a simple concept of I'm using one because it has better stats. This gives me a great opportunity in time to have an intermission and actually explain how stats work in World of Warcraft on the items. There are primary stats and secondary stats. Primary stats are intellect, strength, and agility. One of these stats are utilized by characters based on their class and their specialization, which is pretty much their subclass. Stamina is a raw modifier on total health points and is something that all classes utilize. Secondary stats are stats that all classes also utilize, and they are consistent on items and not randomly rolled. An item's primary stat and stamina value are entirely influenced by an item's item level. An item level of 470 will always make an intellect one-handed sword grant 2,114 intellect and 688 stamina. It's very consistent, and that's why we say that they're stat sticks, because you're just whacking something with a stat stick. If something has higher stats, you're going to take the bigger stat stick. I think this makes an interesting and fair case in the sense of Destiny, because it's very obvious at this point in time that Destiny has a lot of external influence from various other MMOs, seemingly World of Warcraft, because they blatantly copied their artifact system almost one-to-one, but I'm not going to get into that. To wrap this point up, this is why this functionally works in World of Warcraft and why it wouldn't work in Destiny. Because these items have seemingly no identity. Now, there is one exception, which is the trinket slot, and trinkets have an identity because a lot of the times they're a part of a set, which have a set bonus, or they have this equip or on use thing. But this is so far out of the realm of comparing it to Destiny, and I don't want to cover trinket slot items in World of Warcraft because there's so many different variations you could go into. But to TLDR it, pretty much all Destiny items are equal to a WoW trinket in terms of identity. I'm going to work towards wrapping this video up because I don't want this to be another 35-minute video where I'm just ranting about weird things all day. But please, do allow yourself to be persuaded if you can. And if you are persuaded or you follow this kind of similar mindset, please do speak up. Post a comment on a tweet thread or a like or anything like that. Share the videos around that creators are making, because this, I fear, could be a strike against the community that may not end well. I just want to summarize all of this by saying you're not a hamster on a wheel. You should not allow yourself to be treated like one. Do not let Bungie or any game developer or anything like that ever devalue the time and effort you've placed into their product.